Hi everybody, I am Cyril Marcelin, a French grandmaster living in Austria, and I'm very happy to welcome you to my first chessable course on the Carlsbad structure. The Carlsbad structure is a rather common pawn structure where black has pawns on c6 and d5, with no pawn on the e-file, and white has pawns on e3 and d4, with no pawn on the c-file. The Carlsbad often arises in queenside pawn openings, where white plays c4 takes d5, and black recaptures with e6 takes d5. It can also be reached with reverse colors, c3 d4 for white against e6 d5 for black. In queenside pawn openings, where black trades e c pawn against d4, and white recaptures with the e pawn. The Carlsbad can arise from many different openings, for example, queenside gambit, London system, Semislav, Nimzowitsch call system, or even in the Caro-Kann defense when white takes on d5, and many more. When Chessable contacted me, I asked myself what I could contribute to the community. Knowing that all the serious openings had already been worked on by world-class players, I knew I had to offer something different and maybe also more personal. Here are the reasons why I choose the Carlsbad structure. As a player of most of the openings that we mentioned earlier, I encounter this pawn structure in many of my games. In fact, to be honest, I think I have learned the most about the intricacies of this structure in my role as a coach. I strongly believe that students are like mirrors, and it's quite clear to me that most of the mistakes I find in their play are also present in varying degrees in mine. And since it's easier to find mistakes in other people's games than in my own, I would like to use this introduction to thank all of my students who also play the Carlsbad structure. Something practical about this pawn structure. It allows us to build a reliable repertoire with both colors. When I say reliable, I mean openings played at the highest level. London system with white, Queen's Gambit, and Caro-Kann with black. This point is really important. This is especially useful for beginners and young players who want to be ready for action as soon as possible. All great players play this structure more or less regularly. In fact, both the world champions since last year and the best players of today have the Queen's Gambit in their repertoire. By the way, it's no coincidence that this opening was systematically played against d4 in the last World Championship games. At the top level, everyone knows that the Queen's Gambit is a good choice when it comes to not losing an important game at all costs. Oddly enough, the Carlsbad structure has not yet been extensively studied. There is definitely a lack of material explaining the game principles and methods in a comprehensive way. While numerous competent authors use model games to explain examples of minority attacks or other strategic topics, it seems to me that this is still not enough to learn how to make the right decisions over the board. With this course, I'm trying to provide a practical guide for the structure based on 7 concepts forming a kind of easily applicable system. After analyzing a large number of games, I realized that strong players always have more or less the same goals in the Carlsbad structure. My work then consisted of capturing typical situations in which certain methods are used, but also of understanding the factors that favor the use of one method over another. This pawn structure is still complex, of course, but since the resulting positions have a fairly static character, they seem to be well manageable through systematic studying. To clarify, by static, I mean that the possible changes in the pawn structure are quite limited, as well as situations in which a player sacrifices material for positional compensation that is not always easy to foresee. This course has been designed to be studied in the order of the chapters presented. The material can be worked through step by step. At the beginning, we will learn the typical concepts that are useful in more or less all situations in this structure. After that, we will continue with the minority attack, which in my opinion is often overestimated in terms of how dangerous it actually is. We will also look at other less known methods of play. The last 3 chapters go a step further as we will look at practical examples from world champions. In this way, you can get to know a maximum of patterns and at the same time learn how the ideas in the Carlsbad structure have evolved over time. These last chapters will consist mainly of puzzles so that you can apply all that you have learned in the previous chapters. I would also like to add that the material presented in this course will be useful for players of all levels, from beginners to professionals. To achieve this, I have tried to use clear examples without unnecessary tactical complications. Thanks for being here and have fun practicing.